Don't be binary, proactive thinking for coaching. If I have an issue with questions that come into my podcast, it's two things. It's funny. I just said don't be binary, and it's two things. The first is when people ask questions about medical intervention or medical advice. That's just not my area, and I don't feel comfortable giving medical advice. And I don't think my medical advice is very good because not only do I not have the x-ray, the MRI, I wouldn't even know what to do with them if you gave them to me. But the second issue is what I want to talk about, and I think it's a real problem when it comes to coaching, being binary. And that's simply this: either or. Tell me this or that. And coaching is much more nuanced than a simple yes-no. Now, here's the thing. Yes-no is going to come into this lecture, and it's very important. But you've got to have yes-no questions done in a certain method. But let's talk about the basics of binary thinking. It's all those questions that come up. Is this thing good or bad? Is it good or evil? Folks, coaching is not moral theology. There is no right or wrong. So even with something as simple as either or, you run into this binary thinking. I'll give you a better answer in just a few minutes. Here are some examples I get a lot. Is this a good diet? Vegan or carnivore? Well, I don't know. I mean, if you're allergic to all these foods and a diet gives you these foods, eating these foods might be a lot better for you. Is this a good food? This comes up all the time with coffee and red wine and certain vegetables and certain protein sources. And very often it becomes a theology discussion, not a true question on health, fitness, longevity, or performance. What's better? Well, again, you're asking me to do a seesaw question. This or that. I don't like that. This question I hate is the next one. It comes up at Perform Better workshops, or it used to until we stopped it. If you could only do one exercise the rest of your life, what would it be? Well, what, is someone dressed up in an all-black uniform with red stripes on it going to walk up with a gun to my head and say, you must only do this exercise the rest of your life? No, it's a silly question. Folks, I have changed exercise choices for 1,000 reasons between injuries and better performance. Exercises are just a tool. If you only had one tool, what would you use the rest of your life? A Phillips screwdriver. Well, what if you need a hammer? Well, flip it around. No, don't do that. What's the single best? Don't. We're right back into the most binary of binary thinking, that this one thing is the best and everything else isn't. Will this make me a better fill in the blank? Again, I don't know. I can't see the other side. I don't have a chance to run you through 100 different things and see if each one of them works. The next one is, of course, what happens all the time around New Year's Eve. If you would just give me a program or an exercise, I would do it. No, you wouldn't. First, no, you wouldn't. But two, there are no perfect diets and there are no perfect exercise programs. And if there were, the moment you started on them, it wouldn't be perfect anymore because things happen. Things always happen. The final one is a personal note. I had a girlfriend tell me one time, if you don't drive up to Vacaville tonight, you don't love me. Of course, Vacaville was about a 2-hour drive from my home at the time, and it was a Pacific storm, and I was on my motorcycle. When I got to her house, her sister said she passed out drunk about 5 hours ago. So it was a good lesson, and that relationship didn't last very long, because if someone ever tells you, if you don't do this, you don't love me, you're in an either-or relationship and you might want to get running. Now, the answer to this came to me years ago in a very interesting discussion when the book by Covert Bailey, Fit or Fat, came out. Now, I liked the book, and I still like it. I think his emphasis on a few things is too much, and his hatred of fat, dietary fat, is a problem. But the biggest problem with the book was the title, Fit or Fat. there's your two choices. Binary thinking. And when someone asked me about the book the first time, I use the example of the sumo wrestler. Or it could also say an offensive lineman in professional football. Well, there's good reason they're big guys and carry a lot of excessive weight, is because even if it is fat, in a 60-minute football game, I have to keep trying to get around that guy, and that's hard work. So it's possible to be fit and fat if you're a sumo wrestler or a Highland Games athlete, as I discovered. And it's also possible to be not fit and not fat, like with that concept that Josh Hillis does such a good job with when he talks about skinny fat. He uses a number of Hollywood people who look really, really good in clothes and outfits, but when you see them in bikinis, now this is a horrible thing to say, and I feel actually kind of bad talking about it. There's this concept he uses called skinny fat. They're not in good shape, but they look good in clothes, but they're probably not truly fit. And of course, on the extreme end would be someone who's fat and not fit. That would be your Las Vegas example. I once said, and I feel bad about it because it's kind of a jerky thing to say, but if you ever feel terrible about yourself, go to Las Vegas and sit in a chair and watch humanity walk by. Pretty soon you'll probably feel pretty good about yourself. I'm an awful human being for saying that. I apologize, but it's true. And then, of course, there's a thing that Covert would talk about, his ideal, where you're fit and not fat. And all of us slide through that in our lives. But the binariness of it makes it difficult because here's the thing. Where is that line in the sand where you suddenly say you went from fat to not fat? Okay, is it 15%? Is it 19% body fat? Is it a weight on the scale? Most of us like a little bit of a continuum when we talk about something that's this close to our heart. The next example in my career where this came up was a discussion about tension. Now, in another module, we're going to talk in great depth about what I call the quadrants. But just for now, just follow along. In quadrant 4, basically, it's sports that have a single quality that you need. For example, the 100 meters, it's absolute speed. The deadlift is absolute strength. You don't need a lot of other qualities. There's no hurdles in the 100-meter sprint. There's not a lot of things in the way of a big deadlift. But what came up was a discussion of tension. Well, even though you both have 100-meter sprinting and deadlift in quadrant 4, the role of tension is radically different in those two. Now, if you have great tension in the deadlift, you win. But if you have great deadlift, great tension in the 100 meters, you're going to lose. If you have, no tension at all in the deadlift, you're not making a lift. But if you're absolutely relaxed in the 100 meters, good things will happen. These are simple examples. The fit or fat and tension and relaxation discussion in quadrant 4 are simple ways for me to introduce the concept of stepping back and looking at the big picture of performance, longevity, health, and fitness. To step back and pull yourself out of either or. It's not just me who talks about this. When I was young, I read an article in Track Technique by Dave Davis, March and June 1974. And what Dave did was an interesting thing. He talked to the greatest shot putters, well, I was about to say at the time, but really historically, when you look at the names Al Feuerbach, Brian Oldfield, George Woods, Randy Matson, some may remember Bruce Wilhelm and Sam Walker. When he talked to those shot putters, he was asking the question, do you use the power lifts or the Olympic lifts? And what he discovered is that the best shot putters of all time don't have an either or here. They do both. And it's interesting because the foundation of my strength coaching has always been the power lifts and the speed lifts, the Olympic lifts, together, not separately. There is nothing new here. Now, President Eisenhower use a thing that now is referred to as the Eisenhower box. If you read the work of Stephen Covey, he talks about this in great detail. I'm not sure how much he attributes to Eisenhower, but from what I understand, this comes from President Eisenhower and General Eisenhower. Well, you basically you break it up into quadrants, okay? And the quadrants go like this: tasks that are important, tasks that are not important, tasks that are urgent, tasks that are not urgent. Now let's look at the most obvious one first. It's not important and it's not urgent. I will tell you from the heart, throw them out. Stop doing them. Get rid of them. In fact, I think if there's a secret to decluttering your life, it's getting rid of those unimportant, not urgent tasks that you might find yourself doing. It sounds odd to say that out loud, but you might spend a lot of time, maybe it's battling with people on social media over something, on a binary question, or I'm not sure what it is. But if you can just eliminate those things from your life, you're going to pop up with tons of free time. Let's slide over to the next one. And as an administrator, I found this to be a very interesting thing. Tasks that were urgent but not important. Basically, that's checking the box usually. Do you want the chicken salad for the lunch or the tuna salad for the lunch? Folks, the meeting's Friday. Check a box. Here's what I've discovered. Most of the time when you get there, they've already run out of chicken salad and you end up with a ham sandwich anyway. So check the box because it's not that important. As best as you can, I would tell you, binary, do one of two things. Either delegate those tasks to somebody else, which I love that idea, or do what I do with what I call shark habits. Just check the box and get them out of your head. An RSVP to a wedding, to me, is one of those things. Now, it's very important to the bride, so make sure you understand that. And of course, me getting there is going to be important. But checking the box, yes, I will be there, is urgent. The bride needs to know. Shark habit is check the box, send it in, go to that online site, buy the present, and get that out of your head. It's the top level I want to talk about, the most important. These are important tasks that are either urgent or not urgent. One of the things I try to do as an administrator is get rid of urgent out of my vocabulary. I would set up monthly, yearly, and an 18-month checklist for everything that was under my duties. Every 4 years, we had a certain kind of visit that we had to do with the mothership. Well, I knew every 4 years this was coming up. So I would get the paperwork from that 4-year visit, and I would pull it out, and about a year ahead of time, I would look at it, make appropriate changes and corrections, and honestly, most of the time, all the time, I was always the first person to have my materials turned in, because very simply, I had taken something that was urgent and turned it into non-urgent. Having said that, though, life doesn't work that way all the time. I'll give you an example of an important and urgent thing. If you have a child and they throw up on you, you'd like to plan that task out a little bit, but it ain't going to happen. All of a sudden, you've got two things you got to deal with. One, a sick child, and two, you probably have some laundry to do and maybe a touch of hygiene to work on. This has happened to me several times in my life, and I'm hoping it doesn't happen anymore, but you just never know. So I think it's important you focus your time in the important area, schedule things out as best you can. I have monthly checklists, yearly checklists for every task you have, so that nothing ever feels urgent to you, so you can always be focusing on what's important. Once I started thinking this way, I then listened to the work of Tony Robbins. And Tony Robbins has this interesting idea about pain and pleasure and achieving your goals. And the moment I heard that, I thought about this and I turned it into this particular set of this little quadrant. So on your left there, you have do, which means you get your goal, don't, which means you don't get your goal. On top, you have pain first and pleasure second. Well, what does pleasure mean? Well, what is the joy that you will get if you get your goal, or the tough one, don't get your goal? And then there's pain. What is the pain that you'll get if, this is the unusual one, if you get your goal, or if you don't get your goal? And I would have my elite athletes fill this in. Here's the interesting thing. Many of the athletes would write, for example, if I make the Olympic team, what is the pleasure you will get if you make the Olympic team? And one of the athletes said one time, it would be cool. That was it. This person was about to dedicate the next 3 years of their life to high-level, intense training. And the pleasure was it would be cool. And I realized we would have to work really hard with this athlete on improving the pleasure that they were anticipating for making the Olympic team. And I tell you one thing, in many states, you get a license plate that says Olympic team member. You get free admission to all kinds of things the rest of your life. You get a lot of cool gear. Another one is, wait a second, would there be pain if you get your goal? Well, you know what? It's going to upset your schedule. You're going to have to get your passport. You're going to have to do this. You have to do that. Yes, there's pain in getting your goals. Those aren't very tough ones, but I wanted to mention that. Well, the weird one is this. Is there pleasure if you don't get your goal? Well, yeah, if you're starting a new relationship, you don't have to make any changes. That's kind of nice. Or. And I asked the athlete to think through that very carefully. Here's the interesting thing, though. Most athletes, though, the lever of pain is the best thing I can use. So the pain of not getting your goal, the same athlete who said it would be cool also said, and he just got so intense, my ex-girlfriend would be right. Well, that's when I realized that this particular athlete, it was easier to work with the lever of pain than it was with the level of pleasure. Now, that doesn't mean I'm a nice person, but if you have to remind the person of, yeah, your girlfriend's right, on a lazy day, they're not working hard, your girlfriend's right, I'll just leave, she's right. That would light up this athlete and get him working even harder. I wouldn't mind if you spent some time with a serious goal of yours and filling in that. For example, I get asked a lot of time about continuing education, and I'll give the person this little job because, as I always say, if the degree takes 4 years to get, 4 years from now, whether or not you get it, it's still 4 years from now. Well, what's the pleasure of having the name doctor in front of your name? Is that something that'll make you happy the rest of your life? What will be the pain of getting this goal? Well, probably money, maybe even loans. There'll be all kinds of things. But by filling out this simple little chart, many people get this insight that, yeah, it is something I want to do. Or, no, not really. That's just something, it'd be nice, but I don't want to really sacrifice or do the work or whatever. Now, let's have an assignment where you do it yourself. I'm going to explain this, and then I'd like you to turn off this lecture, and then we'll pick up from there. This is called quadrant thinking and thinking ahead. What I'd like you to do about your life is this. I want you to think about a win or a loss in your life. Win or lose in the thing here. Where in some place in your life that you won. You got the dream, you got the thing, you got the person, you got the award, you got where you won. And then I want you to think about times in your life where you lose things, where you lost. What I'd like you to do now, expand on that. Is there places in your life where you had good wins? And then I want you to think of something very unusual. Were there times in your life where you had a win that turned out to be bad? The next part of the assignment, obviously, is look at your life and let's start, it probably easier, where you lost and it was bad. And then I want you to think of the time in your life maybe where you had a loss and it was good. So just turn off the lecture right now and take a couple minutes to fill in the box. Welcome back. Now, in my life, when I did this, I realized that very often in my life, that little box that says good, loss, was filled with these events that led to some of the best moments of my life. Now, I picked this up at the Olympic Training Center where they had us do this highs and lows of our career. And the one guy, since I was the oldest thrower there, came over and said, I knew this would be a good assignment for you. And he showed me how all my lows led directly to my high points. So for me, I began to look at losing completely different. To me now, I look at losing as a springboard to something better. That's where I want you to get, and that's where I want your athletes to get too, also. Now, it might be obvious. Everyone might have a good win or two. I think of there's a national championship that I won in the last throw. There's a Highland Games that I won on a big caber toss. Those were good wins. Jeeper, I'm so happy. But I've also had some bad ones, especially as a coach. You know, I mentioned before that I've been in situations where winning a state championship actually turned out to be a bad thing, either for the athlete or for the program. Very often, when you win something, you tend to forget, well, the bad bounces, if you will, to use the cliche, where you lucked into a victory or two, or something went your way that normally doesn't. But when you have the state championship or the national championship and you raise the trophy, you forget about how close it was. And when you're preparing for the next one, you might get a little sloppy, a little lazy about how things go. And then, if you like, dip yourself into that awful place called bad losses. In one of our upcoming talks, I will share all my bad losses with you. The regionals, the sectionals, the this, the that. And I'll try to be as honest as I can with you. There are times where you really don't dig out very much. Having said that, with all this distance between those events and today, I look back on those losses, and even my bad losses taught me great lessons. Of course, as you might imagine, one day you get pretty sick of learning great lessons. Now, let's move on how I use this professionally. Now, this next slide we will come back to again and again. This will be part of the basics of coaching in strength coaching. Years ago, Pavel asked me, what is the influence of the strength coach? Every so often I find my yellow pad that has all my attempts to answer this question. Well, what I came up with was this very simple quadrant. As you move to the right, your sport or endeavor has more and more and more qualities needed to be successful. Qualities that would be sprinting, agility, height, weight, speed, strength, as many rules of the game, anything you think of. As you move up the axis, you go up in what I call percent of relative max. At the very top, for example, in quadrant 4, you have people running, at the Olympics, you can run a 900 meters and be in 8th place. That is so ridiculously fast. The world record in the deadlift is over 1,000. I deadlift 628. Now, there's a long story behind that, but I'm a D student in the deadlift, and I'm probably stronger than most people you ever meet. Well, that's relative max. So I broke it down into 4 quadrants. It's not perfect, but on the bottom right there is what I call quadrant 1, and that would be middle school, junior high, high school physical education. You learn lots and lots of sports, lots and lots of games. You do lots and lots of exercises. but the relative level is quite low. Okay? I mean, when my basketball team in my sophomore year won our 6-period PE basketball championship, we were terrible. But we were the best in the 2nd period or 6th period in our class. The next one up, upper right, is what I call Quadrant 2, and this is collision sports and collision occupations. This would be SWAT teams, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, and American football and rugby. Lots and lots and lots and lots of things you need to know, and the level is really high. If you ever interact with an NFL football player, they need to know so much. But they also have to be very fast, very strong, very mobile, very, 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 very. And they need to know 1,000 different techniques. That's Quadrant 2, and that's very rare air. Quadrant 3, which is on the bottom left, is where most of us are. And interesting, that's also where track and field is. Basically, the strength coach and the technique coach live in a yin-yang. If I get a track and field athlete stronger, simply stronger, not a lot of extra work, get them stronger, generally they tend to perform better. It's a pretty easy world to live in. So this is where most people are. My job as a strength coach is get you stronger, more resilient, more mobile. Thank you very much. Now go do your thing. And then there on the upper left, of course, is Quadrant 4, which is the rare air. That is basically a single quality, speed or strength usually, at the highest levels humans can do. 100 meters, like I said, 9 nines and 9 faster. If you deadlift 800 in a meet, people pat you on the back and say, nice day. It's gone through the roof. Now, the other thing is that person who deadlifts 1,000 pounds might not be able to walk up a flight of stairs because they're only interested in one quality. Now, the quadrants led me into one of the most interesting insights in my career, is that when I looked at what was happening in my strength and conditioning field, I realized that the quadrants gave me some great insights. So basically this picture, which I've used for years, is that powerlifting, American football, you can include rugby, and special forces have been crushing our other 2 quadrants. There's nothing wrong with powerlifting. There's nothing wrong with football or special forces. But they are a lot more sexy than, telling somebody to do 3 sets of 3 in 5 exercises, which is what I would tell a track and field athlete. Powerlifting coaches are famous for saying, I know this. If I was their coach, they'd be stronger. And that's true. But that doesn't mean they would throw the discus farther, nor does it mean they would do this better or that better. Football coaches and special forces, when you read the health magazines, the fitness magazines, they're always talking like train like a SEAL, train like a Green Beret, train like an NFL player. And honestly, that's not what a 9th grade boy needs to train like to be a 9th grade football player. It leads us to really the great insight of why I do quadrants, and that's appropriate. The appropriate answer is rarely sexy, and that's why I don't make a lot of money in this field. So this is a fun little quadrant I put together to work with actually the American military. I have up there reasonable workouts and tough training, and then on the side, reasonable eating and strict dieting. I'm a believer that you should live in reasonable. Most of the time, you should do reasonable workouts and reasonable eating. Protein, veggies, water, repeatable workouts. Thank you very much. 3 to 5 days a week. We'll see you soon. However, most people don't think they can do that. Instead, and it's just not true, they think they can do tough training with strict dieting. Now, I argue this. Maybe every 4 years you can, though I don't think you can either. I've done a strict diet. I've done the velocity diet. That's 6 protein shakes a day. Now, you can raise your hand and say, what else? That's it. 6 protein shakes a day. When I trained on it, the first 2 weeks especially, I barely could even get in the weight room. I was so kind of throttled emotionally. Then after about that, I was okay. But all I could think about during those 28 days was finishing the diet. Folks, I've got a lot of discipline. I mean, I've done a lot of things in my life that were difficult to do. And I have to say from the heart that with all my self-discipline, just to get through that diet was about as difficult as anything I've ever done in my life. To do a diet. Now, I do think there are times for tough training. And that's what I would think of peaking or prep work. But I think if you're peaking or doing preparation, off-season work, that you need to have a very reasonable training program at the same time. Reasonable eating program at the same time. I apologize. Now, on strict dieting and reasonable workouts, I call it post-party time. I'm fine with you decide to go on the fast mimicking diet, the V diet, something like that. But don't think you can train really hard that time. You only have so much self-discipline. Don't burn it all on, trying to be strict in the diet and strict in your training. It just won't work. Now, one thing I've discovered in my career is when I start sticking the quadrants together, when I start playing around with these ideas together, I've gotten some really good clarity. So somebody asked me one time about this tension relaxation thing in the quadrants. And what happened when I started talking about tension and relaxation in the quadrants, these other concepts leaped into my head. Now, if you can see closely, and we're going to come back to this one again, what I have in quadrant 4 is I have a very simple training program for Barry Ross. But I also talk about here in mindset. We're going to come back to this when we get to later in our course, when we get to arousal levels. But what happened is when I started putting tension, relaxation, and all this stuff together, all of a sudden my mind popped open. And I realized that, if you're a deadlifter, you need a very narrow focus. If you're a 100-meter runner, you need another very narrow focus. But if you're playing defensive back in quadrant 2, you got to be able to see, then break the huddle. So you can get a sense all of a sudden, now why is this guy suddenly running faster than he normally does? That's a clue that he might be getting the ball. When the ball is snapped, your eyes move faster than your feet. So you want to take in as much information as you can. So you want a wide focus. And then the quarterback puts the ball on a line to someone in front of you. Now your focus has to narrow instantly, and you need to break and drive and make a play on the ball or the receiver. So what happens in quadrant 4, you have very narrow focus. In quadrant 2, your focus has to shift in all directions all the time. One of the reasons I think that we have such issues with our people who go off to battle is that the modern battle is, there's noise from every direction, all the way up and behind. There's no, in Napoleon's time, battles happen right here. Well, today, we're in literally a 360, you're in a sphere of battle. And that amount of wide view focus has got to be exhausting over time. And of course, the soldier needs a shift into making a shot or whatever needs to be done. So when you start putting together these concepts, you start coming away with some really interesting insights. The one I also include up here is called managing compromises versus managing options. If you coach football, American football, one of the first things you realize is that there are so many things we have to account for, and yet we don't have the time, the energy, the human power to deal with so many things. So what we have to do is manage compromises. We always joke in high school football that you always have a player you're trying to hide. Well, it'd be nice if you could just go and get on the phone and hire a new player, but you can't in high school. So you've got to be able to hide that athlete on the field. That's managing compromises. Managing options is something that happens down in quadrant 3 where I live. Basically, there's 3 discus throwing techniques. There's the Utah State style, the East German style, and the linear style. There's basically a couple ways to get an athlete strong. There's Olympic lifting, powerlifting, Highland Games, heavy throwing, strongman, or maybe a nice combination of all those. But here's what managing options is. Pick a throwing technique, pick a way to get strong, and then go with it. Does it help to take 10,000 throws with one technique and then shift to the next technique? Now, there might be value to it. I've just never seen it happen. In Quadrant 3, you pick an option and you go with it. If you decide to go low carb, go low carb. Don't go low carb for breakfast, high carb for lunch, paleo for dinner, and then bread maker's diet for a snack. Stick with one thing and go with it. Listen, the research is clear. All diets work if you stick to it. All diets work if you stick to it. But you have to stick to it. That's managing options. Now, as we get deeper into this course, we're going to start going into this area here. What you have here is my performance grid. Health, longevity, fitness, and performance is on top. Health, as we'll go over several times in this course, I'll repeat it to death, I'm sure. I use Maffetone's definition. It's the optimal interplay of the human organs. The organs are doing their job. You test it by blood profiles, seeing your dentist, seeing your eye doctor, seeing your medical doctor, following up on some basics of healthcare. Longevity is a quantity and quality issue. Personally, I'd rather focus on quality. Others focus on quantity. Fitness is the ability to do a task. Performance sounds the same, but it's a little different. Performance is when you do a task when someone calls your name or the curtains open, if you will. When I first came up with this idea, I put it together and I realized that my college coach really taught me the keys here. On the bottom, Coach Mon taught us, make yourself a slave to good habits. Well, I have taken that, and I'll go through this many times, but to this concept of shark habits. One bite and it's gone. I checklist everything I can checklist. I have a nightly menu that we eat with. You are the sum of your habits up to this day. So for me, one of my habits is I wear this shirt. I have 16 to 18 of them, and I always wear basically the same thing. Now, love it or hate it, I don't know, but I don't have to think about it. If you send me an email, I answer. You call me on the phone, I pick it up. To me, those are shark habits. I stick with those. And then, of course, Coach Mon said, little and often over the long haul. And with the help of Pat Flynn, I came up with this pirate map, this pirate map, because I believe you need to trust the process for success. In other words, if I get a good night's sleep every day, I wake up and I'm grateful. I start my day with a short, small, little meditation. I eat 8 different vegetables every day, and then I work out 3 to 5 days a week. And I keep doing that week in, week out, week in, week out. I think I'm going to get to my goal of dancing at my granddaughter Josephine's wedding. She's 5 is the time I'm speaking this, and we're looking maybe 20 plus years down the road. I have to trust the process. We'll come back to all of this because I think this is a very important slide. But one thing I have to make sure I cover is the fact that there is a value in the binary process. And it's when it comes to decision matrices. Now, this is the decision matrix we will use in this course to talk people through how to put up training for them. The first thing I ask literally every single person who comes to work with me is, what's your goal? Now, the interesting thing is I'm not always sure it's very valuable. I'm literally just listening for one thing. I'm listening to see if they're an athlete. If they're an athlete, then we'll look there. They would be an A to B goal. So right there, I just gave you the decision matrix. You're either an athlete or you're not. And the reason I do this is because now we go through the yes-no checklist. If you're an active athlete, I need to know where you are right now, which your best. And if you say in the discus 180 feet, you're a 180-foot thrower. If you say you're a swimmer and you swim 44 seconds, you're 44 seconds. And then what your goal is that other number. A to B. Who you are is this, your goal is your B. The two, the A to B, is the system we're going to put in place to get you there. With active athletes, the only assessment I use is, can you go? Are you ready to go? And if you say yes, we go. If you say no, we're done. Now, of course, we also put you into what quadrant, how much I can help you. Should I reference you to somebody who's much better in the field than I am? Always happy to do it. And then you'll notice as we slide down here, then we'll talk about performance, which is peaking, planning, programming, and principles. And principle comes from the root prin, meaning first, and sipple, meaning from the same root as capture. Principles are those things you do to capture first. And generally, it's the basics, it's the fundamentals. If you're not an athlete, then I slide you over into what I call everybody else. And really, right now, even though it says A, not A, most people truly don't know what their goals are. Oh, they'll say vague things, and we'll go through this several times. Oh, I want to lose some weight, I want to feel better. But they're very vague, and they're very open, and there's not a lot of vision there. So the first thing I do is called the 1, 2, 3, 4 assessment, which gives me one of 7 places, one of 7 categories that we can work with, depending on your mobility, your body composition, or your strength. And from there, we begin working with you on your specific needs. Not your wants, but what your needs are. And in this case, for health and longevity, I try to get you to start thinking about what we call shark habits, learning to anything that's do it, get done, one bite and it's gone. And of course, come up with an appropriate pirate map so that every day you begin this process of doing maybe 5 things every day. And if you repeat those every day, every week, every month, every year, we trust the process, good things will happen downstream. Now, when people talk to me about weightlifting and these kinds of things, very often the concept of exercise selection shows up. And I just want to stop real quick because I want to talk about 2 quick words. Great place to read more about these 2 words is Jurassic Park and Lost World by Michael Crichton, where they have the could we, should we conversations. If someone says, could we, you have an 85-year-old great-grandma who wants to Olympic lift, my response usually is, yeah, if it's done correctly, certainly, let's do that. Now, should we? Well, it depends. Can she hinge? Can she squat? Can she reach the bar and grab it? Those are important questions. If she wants to be the world champion in the Olympic lifts, I could support that. Should we? Well, that's a whole other set of questions. And we move to exercise selection. I come down to this little matrix that I use all the time. Do you have the proper equipment? If you don't do it. If you do, the next question. Do you know the cues for coaching? If you don't do it. If you do you know how to coach it? If you don't coach it. But if you do, I have no objections. So when we work with the decision matrix of how to work with somebody, so the decision matrix starts off, are they an athlete? Are they an everybody else? Certain things come out of there. We decide where they sit. And then from there, when you come to the end of a decision matrix, and that's all the if-then, if they're an athlete or if they are an everybody else. If they're a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, you'll learn that later. Then we sit back, after our exercise selections, then we sit back and say, okay, now go do this. Go do this.